What's going on, everybody? Back again today to do another DC related video. I've been in a huge DC mood. I don't know what it is. Uh, a couple weeks ago, I was fiddling around with some of my DC figures in my collection. I did the I did a video where I was talking about the Todd McFarlane's DC Multiverse line again, and I did a head swap with it's two things really. I read the Multiversity. That got me into DC. Then I started fiddling with the multiverse figures again. I did a head swap where I put the Grim Knight head onto the Arkham Asylum Batman body, and it looked pretty good. I got it on there in a way that it looked pretty good. And the Arkham Asylum costume, it's a bit more realistic and armory than a typical comic book Batman, but it's close enough in my opinion. So once I got that head on there and I was like, oh, okay, put a little extra black paint on the gloves and boots so it's not like this tarnished metal look, it's just this black look. All of a sudden, I kind of had a typical comic book Batman for this toy line. That reinvigorated me even more. Batman's my favorite character, and now I've just been on a big DC kick for a while now. The Suicide Squad is out. Me and my wife are watching that tonight. Yeah, so I just got her to watch Aquaman. So yeah, big DC mood. And here's the thing, I love DC. I got into DC way before I got into Marvel. Uh, I loved Batman since I was 2 years old. Like for my first Halloween, my first year of Halloween, I was one. My parents dressed me as Tigger from Winnie the Pooh. Halloween number two, though, I was fucking Batman. So I've loved Batman for a very long time. And I think when I was four, I was Superman for Halloween. I've loved DC for a very long time. And even though it's just, in my opinion, being very mishandled a lot these days, there is still something at the core of it, at the heart of DC, that is just grand and epic and enduring. And I try to express that to as many people as possible. I try to create as many new DC fans as I possibly can. But in order to do that, I feel like I have to steer them in the right direction, because if I let them just go on their own and try to get into DC, they're going to sample a lot of the shit that's being put out by the people, like I said, or who are mismanaging it. They're going to sample the worst of DC that there is and not the best. So the purpose of this video today is to tell people how to really get into DC, how to learn about this universe, the multiverse really, how to really learn and come to know who these characters are, what makes them tick, what their relationships are, not only to each other, but to the DC multiverse universe as a whole, and just overall provide a bit more of like a doorway into this realm. So, how do you do that? What should you start with? Maybe you want to get into it because you're just looking for an alternative to Marvel. Maybe you've always kind of thought that there was something to it, but you just didn't know where to go. Maybe you remember watching cartoons of DC from the past and you're like, I like those cartoons, so like there's something in here that there is to like. You're right, there is. So we're going to get into it. I'm going to tell you exactly how to get into DC the right way. So, my number one recommendation, how to get into DC. My number one recommendation is to start with the DC animated universe. A lot of people, this is kind of where I lose them, but the way I look at it is, if I can't get them into this, they're probably not going to get into DC anyway, because there really is no better entry into DC than this. There just isn't, you know what I mean? So it's kind of hard. It's like you've got this, if we were to rate how good of an entry into DC this is a 10 out of 10. And the next one, the next best one that there is like a 5 out of 10. So you can see how much of a step down the next best way into DC is. This is the best way to get into it. A lot of people are deterred just because, especially people my age, I'm in my late 20s. A lot of people my age, even a bit younger, they're kind of like, man, I don't know. I don't really want to watch a kid's cartoon. I understand, but it's superheroes. It's not the most adult thing out there anyway. If you ask me, I think the right way to do superheroes is PG-13. Like, you can push the PG-13 boundary as far as you want, as long as it's still PG-13. You've done it right. It's when you start to dip into the R rating too much, that's when I'm like, okay, you're kind of fucking this up. Like, don't get me wrong, there are definitely some characters that were made to be more on the rated R side, Punisher, Deadpool, stuff like that. But overall, the superhero genre, superhero comic book genre type deal, PG-13. That's where we live with that. So this TV show, this series of TV shows, the DC animated universe, they're more like, I don't know, I'd say PG, a hard PG. Like there's times here and there where it dips a little more into the PG-13, but it's mostly PG. And I guess that's kind of where I tend to lose people who are in their mid to late 20s. Even some teenagers are not going to watch this, but it is so good, and you're not going to find a better way to be introduced to all these characters and this universe and get a foundational level of knowledge on everything DC. You're not going to find a better way than watching the DC animated universe. So if this way appeals to you and you want to give it a try, you're going to start with Batman the Animated Series, which started in 1992, and there are 2 Batman cartoons in this list, and you'll notice the difference between them because his costume is different. The one you have to start with is Batman the Animated Series. This is his costume in that. After you watch this entire show, you're going to want to watch the Superman animated series that they made, and it spawned off of the Batman one because the Batman one did so well. After that, I believe there's 3 seasons of this Superman animated series. After you watch that, you're going to want to go ahead and watch the new Batman Adventures. This is the second Batman show. You can tell they changed the animation style a little bit from the previous Batman show. They wanted to make it fit a little bit better with the Superman one and show that they are part of a connected universe. But it resembles the original one enough. Some characters have been completely redone, like Scarecrow or Bane. They look drastically different from the way they did before. But overall, it's a conceivable sequel. It works. You don't really notice it that much. And as you can tell here, the symbol on his chest is different. It's not so much of a blue and gray as it is just a straight black and gray. You'll notice Nightwing is in this show, and he has a new Robin who is not Dick Grayson. So that's the third show you're going to want to watch, is the new Batman Adventures, or sometimes it's just called Batman the New Adventures, whatever. It's the same show. After that, you can go ahead and move into Justice League. And this show, there is a sequel to this show called Justice League Unlimited. Justice League, however, is about, you've already been introduced to Superman, we've already been introduced to Batman. In the Superman animated series, we were introduced to the Flash. There was an episode where Superman worked with the Flash. And we were also introduced to the Green Lantern Corps. However, we were not introduced to this particular Green Lantern. So this show is about this core team, and it develops the backstories of them and the worlds they come from. Hawkgirl, what her deal is, Flash, Wonder Woman, and the Amazons on Themyscira. A little bit more into the Green Lantern Corps, and John Stewart, the Martian Manhunter, and his background being the sole survivor of Mars. This show is very much about this team, and not so much the greater whole of the DC universe as the next series is, which is, like I said, Justice League Unlimited. This is where they took the gloves off. They said, no more limitations. We're going to dive deep. And they gave us so much. And this is where usually each episode will have one of the core Justice League characters in it. Sometimes it doesn't, though. Sometimes it's a complete supporting cast. Like it has none of these people are in it. Usually, though, it'll have at least one of these guys. But then it'll also pair them up with one of these characters, which is the expanded roster of the Justice League. This is they opened up the ranks, and now the Justice League is huge in this show, and it has a lot of heroes, and they go up against a lot of villains. This isn't even all of them here in this picture. So if you can make it to here, this Justice League Unlimited, well, you're going to learn a lot about DC overall throughout watching all of this, but if you can make it here to Justice League Unlimited, this is when it's really going to pay off, and you're really going to get a lot of knowledge about DC. If you just cannot bear watching the old DC animated universe because it's just a little too kid-friendly, the next best thing I can offer you is the DC animated movie universe. This is a series of films that all take place within the same universe, and these were primarily based on New 52 storylines, or at least at first they were, and we'll get into, if you don't know what the New 52 is, I'm going to explain it here in a second. So Flashpoint, Justice League War, Son of Batman, pretty much everything all the way up to about here, Justice League versus Teen Titans, it was all New 52 type stuff. Then they kind of just started to, pick and choose what they wanted to do. Some Justice League Dark stuff. This is meant to be an adaptation of a very popular Teen Titans story arc, in comic book story arc from back in the day. This is an original story, I believe. Death of Superman is an adaptation of the Death of Superman, but they tweaked it to fit into this movie universe. Batman Hush is based off of a Batman graphic novel from like 2005, I believe. Wonder Woman Bloodlines, and then this film series, this collective universe film series, ends with Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, and oh man, is this good. This is like, this movie here makes watching all of this worth it. Are all of these great? No, but this one right here, ooh, oh man, that's so worth it. And a lot of these are really good. Flashpoint, really good. Batman vs. Robin, really good. Justice League Dark, The Death and Return of Superman, Death of Superman, Reign of Superman. Batman Bad Blood was okay. Batman Hush, I thought they did a pretty decent adaptation for that graphic novel. They're not all great, but they are all at least good, and some of them are great, especially this guy. The only reason that this is the second best way to get into DC is because it doesn't really start you off at the beginning. Like, by the time, this is kind of an origin story movie for the Justice League. They all come together for the first time. But at this point in time, Batman is already, he's already had one Robin, which was Dick Grayson, and he already went on to become Nightwing. Batgirl was already a thing, and she already got paralyzed by the Joker. There's so much stuff going into these movies that you're already expected to know. But at the same time, it does feed you a lot of information. This is a New 52, more modern take on Aquaman's origin story. This introduces Damian Wayne, which is Bruce Wayne's biological son. This is where we get a pretty decent introduction to the characters Batwing and Batwoman. This is a good introduction to the Justice League Dark. But overall, when you go into watching this series, it's kind of assuming that you already have a foundational knowledge of DC in general. It doesn't quite hold your hand and explain everything to you the same way that the DC animated universe does with, Superman, Batman, Justice League Unlimited. That one's a little more like, it's literally spoon feeding you everything. But I mean, if you were a kid and you watched the DCAU shows back when they were on TV and you were a kid and you remember a lot of it, you might be able to just go into this and have a good time and know what the hell is going on here. These are definitely some more adult-oriented movies. Each and every one of these has a PG-13 rating, and I believe this one for sure. Some of these have R ratings. Like, they are graphically violent. There's profanity. They're still great though. I still like them a lot. But yeah, these are definitely made for an older audience. So if you have a foundational knowledge of DC already and you just want some more, this is a good place to start. Or if you want to watch the DCAU, Batman, Superman, Batman, Justice League Unlimited, if you want to watch all of that first and then come over here to all of this, you'll be even more well off. The first set of TV shows, animated series, will provide you with more than enough of a foundation level of knowledge to really enjoy these. So those are my two number one ways. Now, the comics. I do not recommend anyone try to get into DC by jumping into the comics. I don't care what anyone tells you, how deep and big of a comic book fan they are. I don't recommend it. Is it possible to enjoy DC comics, to read them and enjoy them? Yes. But is DC good at capturing new readers? No, they are not, because the continuity, the overall story of their comic book universe is just fucked right now. It's a mess, and they've been, for like the past 10 years, they've been trying to like clean it up, and they kind of have a way forward now, but it's still not a really true, it's not a true fix. It's more of just like, hey, look, we fucked up this comic book universe. There's errors, there's inconsistencies. Here's what we're going to do. we're going to patch it up as best we can. We're just going to move forward, and then down the road enough time will eventually go by and people will forget the discrepancies. That seems to be their answer to it right now. I do not recommend anyone try to get into DC through the comics, because you're going to find yourself very confused and very annoyed very quickly. And in case that's not enough to deter you, here's an in-depth explanation as to why. So back in the end of 2011, DC Comics, the company, decided in order to make their comics more appealing to new readers, they were going to restart the entire comic book universe back to square one. They were going to make all the heroes young again. They were going to retell a lot of the origin stories. They were going to start it all over. They were going to hit the reset button on it. They were going to shake the Etch-a-Sketch and start it all over. And they called this new plan, this initiative, they called it the New 52. They called it that for two reasons. One was, at the time, it was stated that the DC multiverse consisted of 52 distinct realities. So there was the main reality and then 51 alternate realities branching off of that one in some way. Also, there's 52 weeks in a year, and they just wanted to release, I don't know, they wanted to do 52 brand new titles. Like, that's how it was going to start off. This initiative was going to kick off. It was going to be each month out of the year, you're going to get 52 brand new comic books in this new version of DC that we're doing. And here's the thing, this idea was really successful at first. For the first year of this idea being printed in comic book form, it sold like hotcakes. It made them a ton of money. People were latching onto it. Yes, a lot of the very old school, hardcore DC Comics fans that had been following DC Comics for decades, they were a little upset by this, because it just took everything that they'd read and learned and pretty much threw it in the trash. Everything from the decades before, everything from like the mid 80s to the end of 2011 was pretty much just now in the trash. And yeah, the old school fans were kind of upset, but DC couldn't really hear their complaints over the sound of money just raining in upon them, because it did what it was supposed to do. It brought in new fans for a time. A lot of people, I think what DC didn't anticipate was new people coming into comics and trying to become lifelong comics fans. They're not used to the cost. You know, someone who's been following comics since the mid 80s, back then comic books were a lot cheaper. And as time went on, yeah, they got more expensive, but they were already so invested in this hobby that they just didn't care. They were going to keep going with it. But now you had people jumping in on it. They were trying to make them into lifelong readers, and comic books were like $4 a piece. So, and there are now DC's over here pumping out 52 new comic books every month. Every month you get 52 new issues of DC to read. And it wasn't exactly clear at first, you know, which ones you needed to read and which ones were just like extra fluff. So people were just reading them all. They were reading anything that they felt they needed to understand the overall story, and they were also reading everything that they needed to just because it looked cool and they wanted to read it. And I'll freely admit, I was one of those people. Up until the New 52, I only bought trade paperbacks. When the New 52 came out, I was like, this is my chance to get on board with this because it's going to be a fresh start. I'm going to do it. About a year into it, I stopped, just like a lot of people did. And real quick here, here's why. Like I said, about $4, $3 to $4 a pop. This is 52 comics. So you do, let's do the math here. 52 times, we'll do $3.50. Hell, I'll do $3 just to, that's $156, and it's backwards, but it's $156 a month. And that's a lot to read. You know what I mean? Like, it's really easy for, like, if we look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, for example, and we look at how that has appealed to new people who were not into Marvel before, even with the new Disney Plus TV shows, they're like 6 to 8 episodes. Even with the Netflix shows, the Daredevil Netflix shows, those were like 10 to 12 episodes once a year. So you're looking at a matter of hours. All right, you're looking at a matter of hours out of your year that you have to give to this thing in order to know the overall story. This is not hours out of your year. This is hours out of your day. This is hours out of your week. And couple that with the almost like $150 price point. The 150, that is the max. That's if you're buying all 52 issues, but this is a lot to read. So these new readers that the New 52 brought in, they didn't stick around, you know? They fell behind on reading this stuff because there's just a lot to read. They kept forking out more money for more of it, and eventually they just went, fuck this. And I was one of them. I was like, fuck this. I'm going to go back to trade paperbacks. I'm not doing this shit. I don't want to bear the expense. I'm not keeping up with it. There's too much to read. I'm not doing it. And all those new readers, all those new consumers, DC Comics readers that the New 52 was designed to pull in, they vanished. They were gone. And all that left DC with their base of long-term fans who had been into this shit for a very long time, and them just going, fuck the New 52, fuck the New 52. And that's when DC went, oh shit. And then they turned to their golden boy Jeff Johns, who was like he was the chief creative officer at DC. He gets DC. He's really good at what he does. And they turned to him and some other people and were like, we got to fix this shit. Like all those, basically the New 52 was propped up on new readers. Those new readers didn't stick around. They dropped off the face of the earth and said, fuck this shit. And once they went, the New 52 fell out beneath, it just went away. There was no more support for it. Both like verbally, there was no like emotional support for it. No one really gave a shit, and there was no financial support for it. It was going downhill. So that was probably around 2015, maybe end of 14, when that happened, and they realized we got to do something about this. So they tried. They started another new initiative called DC Universe Rebirth, which was going to be like a year-long initiative thing that was going to build up to and culminate with this big event called Doomsday Clock. And long story short, this was meant to fix everything. All the build-up in between that led to this was meant to fix the DC universe and basically restore it to what it had been before the New 52. Remember how I said that all those old school fans were pissed because everything they'd read from like the mid 80s to the end of 2011 was thrown in the trash? Well, all this here was meant to bring that stuff back. Everything from the mid 80s to 2011 was going to get brought back, and they were just going to take the New 52 and they were going to throw the New 52 in the trash and pretend like it didn't happen. It didn't work out that way, though. Another thing got fucked up because this book right here, the one that was supposed to save the day and fix everything, that book ended up being super, super late. Not only was it was about 6 months late starting, and then it took them, once it did start, it took them 2 years to finish it. So it was just super late, and in the meantime, DC had to put something out. They had to write and distribute and sell something. So they turned to another creative team, and we got the metal stuff. This was like Scott Snyder was the guy. He started it off with this Dark Knight's Metal idea, which was pretty popular and it was pretty well received. And then they put him on the main Justice League comic book that comes out every month, and he did his whole big story arc in the Justice League book that leads right into his sequel to Metal, which is Death Metal. And it is at the end of Death Metal, that he claimed that they say that like everything has been fixed. Everything has been fixed. The reality, the continuity of the DC Comics universe has been fixed. That's what this claims to do. It really doesn't, though, because even though the Doomsday Clock book was super late, they still spent a lot of time building up to it and alluding to it. And then, almost like like right in the middle of doing that, they switched over to this idea and building up and leading into this. So even though this does kind of fix everything, it also doesn't, because while this does mention Doomsday Clock, and it implies that the Doomsday Clock story, even though it was late, it did eventually happen. But it's really, I'll put it this way, it's really hard to narrow down when in the timeline of events the Doomsday Clock book takes place. It's really hard to pin that down. It's almost like it doesn't. It's almost like the Doomsday Clock story, even though they built it up and it was originally supposed to fix everything, because it was so late, it's like it no longer has a real place where it fits in. They say it does, but it really doesn't. And that's what I mean by DC just basically being like, hey, fuck it. It doesn't, we fucked it up. We fucked this thing up. It doesn't make sense. Sorry, we're moving forward. And I can kind of understand why they're doing that, because even though they promised us the Doomsday Clock fix, when that proved to be late and they switched over to this stuff was really well received. And people really enjoyed this. People really enjoyed Scott Snyder's run on Justice League building up to this, and this one people really enjoyed, and it sold like hotcakes. So it's almost like DC was like, "Hey guys, we're gonna fix everything with Doomsday Clock," and then Doomsday Clock was late, and DC went, "Hey, don't ask about Doomsday Clock anymore." And the fans were just like, "Okay, what are we reading then?" And DC went, "You're gonna read this metal stuff." And the fans went, "Okay," and they were just cool with it. You know, even though it doesn't make sense and shit doesn't fit together right, it's pretty much that. They were just like, "Hey guys, look, we fucked up. If you guys could just not bring that up anymore and just like move on from here and go with the flow, can we please do that?" And the fans seem to just being like, "Yeah, okay, we'll just never bring up the fact that you guys fucked this whole thing up ever again." And I think it's just because DC comic book fans, they're just so tired of it being fucked up that they're just kind of like, "Look, if move on, just chalk it up to a loss and move forward from here, sounds good." You know, it's like when you're gambling at the casino, and at a certain point you just got to cut your losses and like, "Look, I've lost this much money, I'm not winning it back, I got to leave with what I still have in my pocket." It's almost like that. It's like that's the way a lot of DC fans are looking at it. They're like, "Hey, look, they fucked it up, they broke it, it doesn't work, it doesn't fit, it does not make sense, but they can't, like, they're not fixing it. We just got to move forward." Me personally, I say no. You go back and you fix that shit. And we all know what has to be done to fix it. They have to throw out the new 52, but that's another video, which is on my channel. Please check it out. It's called DC Rebirth, What Happened. But anyway, that is why I don't recommend getting into DC with the comics. However, if you are not going to listen to me and you are going to try and read the comics, here's how I do recommend you do it. Start with pretty much everything. There was an event that came out in an event that came out in the mid 80s called Crisis on Infinite Earths. Don't pay attention to that. I mean, read that book if you want to. It will come up later on, but it's not really where you need to start. But anyway, start with stuff that book came out in the mid 80s. Start with stuff that came out right after that, right after Crisis on Infinite Earths, and read all the way through up till you get to the New 52. And then once you get to the New 52, do a little bit of research online and figure out what it is you need to read to get you to death metal. And like basically don't delve into the New 52 any more than you have to. You're definitely going to have to, especially with Batman. But everything from the New 52 that you can avoid it. Once again, by doing this, are things going to line up? No. You're going to come across some inconsistencies and some errors. But I think if you do it this way, if you read from mid 80s to New 52, and then once you get to New 52, you just streamline your way to death metal. I think not Doomsday Clock. Streamline your way to death metal, not Doomsday Clock. If you do it that way, you're going to find less inconsistencies and errors than you would have found if you actually just read all of it. So, just to recap, number one way, DCAU, DC Animated Universe. It is the most cohesive, most well put together, well done version of DC ever. And it probably always will be. Next, the DC Animated Movie Universe. Another animated property, it's a series of movies. It does require you to have a foundational level of knowledge about DC going into it. But if you feel like you already have that, go ahead and give it a try. Or if you want to get into DC and the DC Animated Universe just seems a little too childish, try those animated movies, the DC Animated Movie Universe. And if you're not going to do either of those, I recommend you don't get into DC. But if you're not going to listen to me and you're going to try and read the comics, like I said, mid-80s to New 52, and then read the least amount of New 52 that you have to just to get to Death Metal. And then you're good to go. So that's, in my opinion, how to get into DC. If anyone has any more specific questions, please leave some comments below. I'll do the best to answer them. Other than that, if you liked what you saw here, please give the video a like. Check out some of my other videos. Hit the subscribe button if you like. And other than that, I will see you guys later.